Okay, we'll start with this. Well, you know, the weekend wasn't a complete wash in terms of predictions.
Thank God.
You know, there were 3 fights I made judgment calls on, and it appears that I was right to make the judgment call that David Lemieux had what it took to put Spike O'Sullivan
down
on the canvas. This wasn't a painfully hard fight to dissect because the fight didn't last very long. Essentially, you've got 2 bangers, 2 guys that are going to open up on each other. And the determining factor in that situation is, okay, well, which one of them is a bigger puncher than the other? That proved to be David Lemieux. There's not a lot to dissect here. At the end of the day, when you've got 2 guys who have a very similar style that doesn't offset any of the other guys' strong suits, that makes them both subject to each other's virtues. But it just so happens that David Lemieux is, you know, he's got faster hands than Spike O'Sullivan, and he's got a far bigger punch than Spike O'Sullivan. He's got a far more dangerous left hook than Spike O'Sullivan, which is what put him on the canvas. So, you know, there's not a lot to reflect upon here. I felt that David Lemieux, in spite of, you know, because he's seen better days, let's just be honest. And at this point, he's only a danger to a certain kind of fighter. You know, any guy that can hit, not get hit, stick and move, got a good set of legs, knows how to navigate the ring, you know, roll a punch, slip a shot, things like that. Any guy like that
outboxes David,
has a good chance against David, because these are the things that will keep him out of range. These are the things that will cause him to struggle. But in terms of bangers, if you're looking at any guy out there who's got an affinity for trading, these are the kinds of guys that David Lemieux is still a threat to. Spike O'Sullivan, he happens to be one of those guys. I'll tell you that, you know, I can still see interesting fights for a guy like David Lemieux that maybe won't, you know, maybe they wouldn't get him a world title, but they would still be visually appealing fights. Like, for example, let's say Danny Jacobs fights Sergey Derevyanchenko and Danny wins the fight. I wouldn't mind seeing a Sergey versus David Lemieux fight, because those guys are both bangers, so it can be a visually appealing fight. So David's still got his virtues, and, you know, congratulations to him. And the second fight that I actually called right was the fight between 154-pound WBO champion Jaime Munguia against tough contender Brandon Cook, who, you know, he did what he could out there. Now, I had Munguia winning this fight by way of a TKO stoppage. That was what I anticipated seeing. However, it ended much sooner than I anticipated it, you understand. I had it happening somewhere around, you know, maybe the 7th, the 8th. Munguia took care of him in about 3, I think it was. 3 rounds.
Not bad.
And I think that Munguia showed improvement in this fight, believe it or not. I'm not telling you guys to think highly of Brandon Cook or something like that, like, oh my God, this is such a big scalp. No, I wanted to talk about the quality of Munguia's punches. You see, a lot of times you get a pressure guy like Munguia, you know, real gutsy fighter, wants to get in close, wants to do damage. A lot of times you get a guy like that, and they get so far within range that they start to smother their own work. Whereas, if you noticed here, Munguia had some good spacing between himself and Brandon Cook, and that spacing, that gave him the kind of leverage
to add power,
to really drive those punches, drive those body shots. You know, pre-fight, I said, I see Brandon Cook being overwhelmed by the physicality of Jaime Munguia. I feel that, you know, since Brandon is an aggressive kind of boxer puncher who wants to get within range as opposed to fighting at range, since he's the kind of guy who uses his jab as a key to come forward and get within range to get into his sweet spot, when he tries that with Jaime, he's going to see that Jaime's got the bigger guns, and he's going to end up pinned down on the ropes, being overwhelmed. Essentially, that's exactly what happened. It just happened much sooner than I expected. I think that Jaime Munguia is coming along nicely with the kind of style that he's got. Very fan-friendly style. I mean, he's no finesse fighter. You can see that. And there's definitely still room for improvement. But with the kind of fighter that he is, he can be a very interesting player in some very big fights, some very meaningful fights in the future. Because he's a very young guy who's got his whole career ahead of him. All things considered, yeah, Jaime's a bit on the crude side, but I liked what I saw from him in this fight, and I look forward to seeing more from him. More improvement from the WBO champion, Jaime Munguia. Now, let's be completely fucking honest here that I don't imagine that either of those 2 fights that took place on the undercard last night, I don't imagine that either of those 2 fights are the fights that you've got on your mind right now. Nobody's sitting around thinking, what is the aftermath of the fucking Jaime Munguia versus Brandon Cook fight? there is one fight that took place last night that is reverberating throughout the boxing community, and we all know which one it was. It was the fight between Canelo Alvarez and Gennady Golovkin, the rematch. And now what we're going to discuss is what effect that has on the pound-for-pound list, particularly my pound-for-pound list, the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list. Well, ladies and germs, you all know how this works. If you didn't see the video that I posted 2 weeks ago, this is just a refresher.
Your mind, Queen.
Canelo Alvarez is now not only a unified alphabet champion, but he is the lineal champion and the Ring Magazine champion. And this is yet another division where he's been a unified champion. So, with him eking out this win, you know, some people, let's just face the facts. There are some people out there that are crying robbery.
Of course.
There are some people out there that they don't feel Canelo won this fight. They just feel that he got the popular vote or whatever, however you want to justify it.
Maybe he did.
To those people, I'll say this much. Abel Sanchez himself, Gennady Golovkin's own trainer, isn't making the excuses that you're making.
¿Qué tan doloroso es que se pierda por un round?
No es nada doloroso, porque nosotros tenemos la misma chance de ganar o perder. El doceavo era el round que decidió la pelea. Decepcionado que perdimos, obviamente, pero de no ser uno hipócrita, de tratar de decir que nos robaron, ¿eh? Porque la diferencia de la pelea fue un round.
The fight was close. The fight was close enough that you could have scored it for Canelo. I myself didn't. I scored it for Golovkin. I had him up by 1 round. But even with that, as I said in my previous video, I felt that it was close enough that maybe it's too close, because I could be wrong about one of these 2 rounds. I mean, I was wrong about the prediction, right? I had Golovkin stopping Canelo, and that's not what happened. So if you can be wrong about the prediction, you can be wrong about who 1 or 2 rounds might have gone to. The fight was close enough that I see an avenue for it to have been scored for Canelo. I don't necessarily agree with it. I'm just not up in arms about it. It's a close fight. I mean, Abel Sanchez isn't protesting the decision, and he's Golovkin's trainer. So what the fuck are you so bent out of shape about? Anyway, it being that Canelo Alvarez defeated Gennady Golovkin yesterday, I know some of you don't like the sound of that, but it being that he's holding his belts now, okay?
That sucks.
It being that this is what happened, Canelo Alvarez emerges as number 4 on the Ring IQ pound-for-pound list, moving Alexander Usyk down to number 5. Now, some of you might be asking for the rhyme and the reason behind this, and I'll reiterate just some very quick talking points. A lot of people, you know, when they actually make pound-for-pound lists, they don't really give it much thought. They just, you know, they rank fighters that they think are good fighters or fighters that they're really fond of. We all know how it goes.
Unfortunately.
But the reason that Canelo is at number 4, in spite of this being a significant win for him, probably the best win he's gotten in about 3 years, it being that it's such a significant victory over such a highly rated opponent, you know, he's a top 5 guy.
At minimum, based on yesterday.
But what I'm seeing from people is, you know, there are guys out there ranking Canelo as high as number 1 based off of this single victory. And, you know, those are your lists. You can structure them however the fuck you want. They're either going to make sense or they're not going to make sense once people look at them. That's the bottom line. So if you want to put him at number 1 because of yesterday, because of a decision that is kind of controversial.
Kind of.
You know, hey, do what you want to do. But the reason Canelo sits at number 4 is because, lest we forget,
not number 1.
This is the first fight that Canelo Alvarez has had in 12 months.
A full year.
You know, that's the rhyme and the reason behind my list. This is the first fight that Canelo Alvarez has had in 12 months, and it was a controversial decision. It is. It's a decision that some people are protesting. A lot of the professionals, the pundits, the fans, they are protesting this decision. Just like the first time. They protested the draw, and now they're protesting this. So the decision is controversial. And this is the most significant thing that Canelo Alvarez has done in the last 12 months. If we go before that, the most significant thing he would have done was the initial draw with Golovkin. Which most people, they looked at that as Canelo lost, and they threw him a lifeline. If we go before that, he fought Chavez, Julio Cesar Chavez Jr.
Who sucks.
Who didn't even have a fucking rank. I mean, this guy was not an elite fighter at the time that they fought. He was nothing more than a familiar name. A familiar name of an even more familiar name.
His dad.
Julio wasn't an elite fighter. I think Canelo Alvarez is probably, you know, around that time frame, what was arguably his most solid win was probably Liam Smith because, you know, Liam was undefeated and Canelo stopped him with a body shot. But we know all the stuff that was going on around that time, that Liam really wasn't the best guy that Canelo could have been fighting at that point in time. To make a long story short, the last 2.5 years for Canelo Alvarez, he really hasn't been facing the best of the best, per se.
Not really.
You know, when he did face the best of the best last year, all he got was a draw.
Quote unquote.
He didn't fight for 12 months after that, and what he got was a controversial decision. It's a significant decision, it's a significant victory in a significant fight, and that gets him number 4 on the Ring IQ pound for pound list. But I'm gonna tell you something. When you have two fighters that are as polarized as these guys are, and the fight itself, the rematch, has this kind of build-up, it's very hard to get an honest opinion, an honest take, an honest, unbiased take as to what actually took place in the fight.
Good luck with that shit.
You see, Triple G had haters and Canelo had haters, so at the end of the day, you're gonna end up bumping into some of these guys in the YouTube boxing community or the Facebook groups, and they're gonna say things like, oh, well, I had it 8-4 for Triple G, or oh, Canelo beat Golovkin's ass, and none of those idiotic comments, none of that shit accurately reflects what took place yesterday. It doesn't. You know, at best, you can say that both of these guys gave each other all they could handle. Both of them exhibited elite-level qualities.
Both of them.
You know, I saw Golovkin fire a left uppercut, a leaping left uppercut. He leaps, he throws the uppercut, he misses. Canelo fires a counter.
Misses.
Golovkin pivots as he's leaping, avoiding the counter from Canelo. I mean, it was a lot of elitism going on in this fight, but you're not going to hear that from most of these guys, because most of these guys...
Dickheads.
They're not really, you know, their commentary, their rhetoric, it's not actually motivated by boxing. I'm going to call a spade when I say that a lot of people hate Gennady Golovkin because he's not the same race as them.
They're racist.
That's just the truth of it. A lot of these guys you see berating Gennady Golovkin and exalting Canelo for beating him. Consider this. They call Golovkin a one-dimensional hype job.
Okay.
So why would beating a one-dimensional hype job make you an elite fighter or a pound-for-pound fighter? Essentially, you guys are calling Canelo the best thing since sliced bread.
The fuck?
For beating a one-dimensional hype job?
Wait a minute.
Do you normally give guys credit for beating one-dimensional hype jobs this much credit? Do you normally do that? No, obviously it doesn't make sense. What makes sense is that Canelo Alvarez exhibited a lot of elitism, and he made an adjustment that Gennady Golovkin and Abel Sanchez, they weren't expecting him to make. But in turn, Gennady Golovkin, in spite of that adjustment, at 36, 37 years old, he was still able to contend and keep it close and competitive. Close and competitive enough that the majority of pugilists and pundits still scored the fight for him by at least one round. Hell, I scored the fight for him for at least, by at least one round. But I reiterate, like I said in my last video, when the fight is competitive, when the rounds themselves are competitive, when it's not a whitewash, when it's not a wipeout, when each round is competitive.
Shit happens.
Winning a fight by one round, you might have him winning the fight by one round, but the judges might have him losing the fight by one round. This is boxing, ladies and gentlemen, and this isn't the first time that a close decision, it wasn't what people wanted, but it's what they got. You ask me, they both fought well. You ask me, last night's fight did not make me a Canelo fan. I still think Golovkin won the first fight. I still view Canelo Alvarez as a cheater. I mean, yesterday's fight isn't going to rewrite history, This is a guy that tested positive for a performance-enhancing drug. That's on your legacy forever. People are going to look back and remember that, But at the end of the day, was yesterday's fight a good fight? Yeah, it was a good fight. And if you feel that one guy got his ass beat, I guess both of them got their asses beat, because they were both bleeding by the end of the night. I mean, you got a lot of guys that are running around saying that Golovkin isn't very good, for example. He's not a very good fighter. Well, if he's not a very good fighter, then why are you giving Canelo so much credit for beating this fighter who's not very good? You're telling me that Golovkin is not a very good fighter. At least that's what you guys have been telling me, that he's not a very good fighter. He's a hype job. It's not that good. So you're telling me that a pound-for-pound fighter in Canelo fought to a decision, not once but twice, with a fighter who's not very good? So what the fuck does that say about Canelo? Hey, man, I don't know. Look, a lot of these guys are fucking racist. That's on both ends of the spectrum. You got plenty of guys out there that they're not motivated by boxing. They're motivated by their own racism. And yes, that applies to all of you.
Pieces of shit.
I don't even really know why the fuck a lot of you motherfuckers come here.